In this video, you're going to see an excerpt from a private consulting call I did with an investment analyst specific to Q&A around AI agents, what it means for the space, the investment due diligence process, and all of the things that have come out recently on the back of Manus AI. For those of you who don't know me, I'm James Nguyen. I'm the CEO and founder of Inflexion Transcribe. We've been building AI workflows with humans in the loop for the investment due diligence space and expert networks since 2019. So our clients include some of the top 5 expert networks in the world, as well as multi-billion-dollar financial data platforms. This is a Q&A session from one-on-one consultation.
You said Manus is an AI agent. As I understand it, we can create agents on ChatGPT. Am I correct?
Yeah, great question. Specific to creating quote unquote agents on ChatGPT, there's a couple of distinctions, right? On ChatGPT, you can create projects or custom GPTs. Now, they won't necessarily be autonomous agents. Remember, one of the characteristics of agents, quote unquote agency, so can they go off and do a task for you without too much intervention? And obviously, nudge a human for, feedback about whether it's on the right track or not. So ChatGPT's custom GPTs don't do that, right? Custom GPTs are essentially projects that are customized based on instructions, that are customized based on understanding the types of answers you want. Maybe it has a customized knowledge base, but it can't go off and do a task necessarily for you. Now, maybe people who argue, yes, but with deep research, that's essentially a research agent, right? That's true. It can go out and do those things. This is positioned as a general AI agent, right? So deep research would be, okay, can we compare like for like Manus AI as a research agent versus ChatGPT deep research as a research agent, right? And then comparing the different output in terms of what is the other potential agentic workflows that are possible on a ChatGPT or on a Claude. We're seeing ChatGPT with Operator, right? Operator dropped earlier in the year. That's what they positioned as the first introduction to autonomous agents. But from all the feedback we're seeing in the industry of testing it ourselves, it's kind of clunky. It's not able to achieve the level of speed, the level of nuance as we're seeing with Manus.
Is Manus based on a foundational LLM? Is it an independent LLM by itself? If it is, why is it called an agent and not an LLM?
Yeah, okay. That's a really good question. So the answer was we need to dive into the weeds of what exact LLM they're using. But from my understanding of different agents, an agent uses an LLM. So agent and LLM aren't interchangeable, like they're not the exact same thing, right? An agent is in the same way a person can use ChatGPT, can use Claude, can use Grok, can use, Perplexity, any of these things. Manus is the same thing, right? And so it could potentially be using a multitude of different LLMs, or in the equivalent of if it was open source, we could interchange the actual LLM that it is being used on. So we need to dive a little bit deeper to understand what the LLM is using. I don't know if it is using specifically an OpenAI or not, or potentially it could be just a fine-tuned open source version of it, right? And so I don't believe the actual innovation of the LLM is the differentiation for Manus. It's actually the agentic workflow and how it actually interfaces with a virtual machine and is able to follow instructions. But having a reasoning model behind it or an LLM that is fairly sophisticated is one of the proponents of why it's able to create the different steps that it's able to create.
So you said Manus has memory, right? Mm-hmm. If I use ChatGPT to build an agent, like a prompt generator, for example, and then use the prompt generator multiple times to create different prompts, does that not mean that the LLM, ChatGPT in this case, has memory already? So how is it different? Like, how is that different? Why does ChatGPT not have memory? Why does Manus have memory is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, great. So in terms of memory specific to an LLM, like let's say you have an individual conversation with an LLM, right? So take ChatGPT, take Claude, doesn't really matter. If you're speaking within that conversation, there's a number of different things even before you start that, right? Maybe it's within a project that has instructions. Those quote unquote instructions can be thought of similar to memory, right? But across different projects, let's take ChatGPT, across different projects, it may not remember everything that you've asked for it, right? Because the memory is project specific, right? And then let's say at a micro level within a conversation, let's say something at the start of the conversation, you've given context. You say, I am part of this company. I am, an investment analyst, and you give some sort of persona definition. It's going to remember that in the context of the conversation, right? But if you take it outside of that and you actually ask it, quote unquote, to do something, which right now you can't necessarily, but let's say you start a brand new chat and you ask, ChatGPT to do something, it may not actually remember all the different nuances here. Now, caveat, ChatGPT does say it does have memory, but specific to what it remembers, how you want output, all these different nuances, there's a process for you to actually code that in and a process for you to actually input it, but that's not necessarily universal across every single LLM. So the fact that Manus is saying it has memory What I believe it's alluding to, we are trying to replicate the equivalent experience of somebody joining your team. So any sort of digital worker, digital employee, digital teammate, they will have memory of the different ways that you want output done or the different ways that you want tasks done. As of right now, if we're using like for like the different agents that are available in other LLMs, right? Let's take ChatGPT's deep research. The ways that I ask for a research document from ChatGPT are not remembered between different research documents. But from what Manus is showing, that if you say this is how I want research documents done, in the future, if it performs a similar task, i.e. its research capability, its research agent, from what we're seeing here, the expectation is it would remember the sort of format, the sort of output, the sort of writing style, the sort of end objective, right? But in ChatGPT Deep Research, which is the research agent of OpenAI, we're not seeing that, right? So that's where the memory differs.
You talked about Manus having authoritative data sets, right? So essentially, if things that are behind a paywall, Manus can do that. So let's say I pay for something, have a document, upload it on ChatGPT, create an agent, and then have to do the request. Is there any material difference between me doing that versus me asking Manus to do it?
Yeah, good question. The main difference here is the volume with which you can do that, right? As a human, sure, you can download one document, you can download maybe 5, 10, but you're going to have to be that human in the loop to upload it back into ChatGPT. With Manus, the main difference here is you can do it at scale, right? So instead of uploading one document, you might upload 1,000 documents, right? Because it has access to the API. So the volume with which it can actually process information, because it has direct access via an API, that's the equivalent of saying, hey, why would I build an application that can access all of, a certain data set when I could download all of the data set, then re-upload it to ChatGPT every single time, right? It's both in terms of the frequency with which you actually want to do and perform that action, as well as the volume of data with which you actually want to synthesize and process at the same time. So that's the main difference. Absolutely, you could do that, but it becomes very, very impractical and unscalable when you're talking in the magnitudes of thousands, even millions of data points, versus what Manus is potentially alluding to, which is being able to do that sort of volume at scale with that level of frequency, right? You can only, click your mouse so quickly to upload so many files so consistently. And it means you're the bottleneck. As a human, you have to be in front of the computer, right? Manus, the potential innovation here, if it does perform in the way it says it does, is it can call it directly via an API, which is essentially what platform and applications are built to do.
Do you see institutions with privacy laws in place using an open source versus something like a ChatGPT that is not?
Couple considerations here. So let me just clarify that Manus is not open source, right? But we can see here 9th of March, an open source version of Manus has already dropped, right? Just 2 days after Manus has dropped. And so, the main differences here, and again, this is very quickly evolving every single day within the industry anyway. The main differences is we believe closed source versions and closed source models are a little bit further ahead, just very minorly, right? But they're a little bit further ahead in terms of their sophistication, in terms of their capabilities, in terms of what they can do, right? We're seeing that in terms of what Manus can do, OpenAI can do, Claude can do. DeepSeek is the nuclear bomb that kind of blew up that paradigm in terms of, okay, there was an open source model that was apparently trained on a lot less and therefore a lot cheaper to create net. There's a couple of nuances there, but if that was the case, it means that open source is catching up very quickly. Previously, we thought that maybe open source was maybe a year behind. Maybe now it's 6 months behind. Maybe it's only 1 quarter behind, 3 months behind. So we don't know. But, I think the macro implication here is it's a forcing function to improve the floor of the entire industry. So all the models are now in a race to go out very aggressively. There's speculation around DeepSeek R2 dropping very, very soon, right? And so, that's all out of the wake of Grok 3 just dropping, Sonnet 3.7 just dropping from Claude, as well as OpenAI's 4.5, right? What we're going to see is there's going to be ChatGPT 5. There's going to be Claude Sonnet 4. All of this is going to happen really, really soon. So the trade-off really is if we choose open source, then the benefits here is there's a little bit more control around security, right? Governance of data. You have control over where the data flows and where the data is actually stored. You have control over the actual training process of data. All of those are a consideration. But the trade-off here is potentially the sophistication of its reasoning, the sophistication of its ability to use multiple tools. Maybe that's the trade-off, right? And so Which one company is going to use overall? Well, it's different flavors, right? People are going to have different reasons. There's going to be different trade-offs. Potentially people are willing to trust these closed source providers, someone like an Anthropic, someone like an OpenAI. And again, for me, the bet is directionally that these are compliance and data sovereignty and use of data is going to have to be solved. They're going to be solved if OpenAI or Anthropic are going to penetrate big enterprises, right? So for me, it's a when, not if. But of course, everybody is going to apply their own level of discernment, their own level of judgment, whether that is a risk that they want to take on. And if it's not, then they're likely going to be choosing an open source. And with DeepSeek really innovating and really pushing that frontier forwards, you can see here the open source community has created an open source Manus 2 days after its release. Now, is this as good? We don't know. But the fact that open source is being pushed forward, then the trade-off and the opportunity cost of going open source with a potentially higher compliance benefit and security benefit, maybe that trade-off isn't as significant if the models are able to progress as quickly as they're progressing and catch up and keep very, very close in terms of their capabilities to closed source models, as well as having the opportunity there to fine tune models as well, which you can do with open source specific to a use case, specific to a workflow. If you also have proprietary data sets that you can train on to customize an open source model specific to how you want to use it or how you want to deploy it in a workflow, they're the potential benefits as well.
Got it. One final thing I kind of wanted to understand, if we draw a parallel to, let's say, programming languages, right? Let's say there's C++ and Java, there's a problem I need to solve. I can use either C++ or Java to solve it, and different people kind of specialize in that. Is there an advantage to me specializing in one LLM, or is it, given the nature of LLMs, that has no advantage, you can learn everything at the same time?
I would say there are very small nuances, almost stylistic. And, the reason I am somewhat opaque with the qualifiers of the differences between LLMs is because even people in the industry, what we're seeing right now is some people just prefer Claude. Some people just prefer OpenAI. Some people just prefer Grok. They just prefer different models for different use cases. My point of view is having a holistic idea of when to deploy each is really important, right? The directional bet or hypothesis for me is that humans are going to become more like managers, right? And so if we have a team of employees or a number of different team members on your team, understanding who is good at what suddenly becomes a really, really beneficial skill set as a manager, right? So understanding what LLM is good at what suddenly becomes a really, really beneficial skill set. So should somebody specialize only in one? Well, my view is no, because there's going to be different use cases for each of the LLMs. Now, somebody can have a preference for, say, OpenAI because they want to use it for something very specific, or Claude, which is right now known for coding, as an example, right? However, perhaps you might use OpenAI more for its deep research because it's right now connected to the internet. And now, there's no API exposed for deep research as of today, so maybe that can't be done. But each LLM has a different function. Each LLM right now is proving in the market that they are going to be, be used for different workflows. And we have predictions from people who are very senior, both Anthropic and OpenAI, who are suggesting that over time they're going to be less "quote unquote" competitive because they're going to be almost niche down. Is probably the best way to analogize it. Different LLMs are going to become very specialized in different ways, and they're going to satisfy different tastes of actual customers or even users. From a more holistic view, what we're seeing specific to, in the investment due diligence space, what we're seeing is having an understanding of the different use cases that different LLMs actually satisfy is incredibly important. So that's where we're seeing it. And Manus really just is introduced as another tool in the same way. Needing to know the benefits and the potential risks of DeepSeek is really important. So Manus is the exact same thing. It's a new tool, understanding where it fits in our workflow, but understanding we have a new team member that if we so chose, we could call upon to execute potentially autonomous tasks, or at least take us 80% of the way there.
Got it. Again, just a clarification here. I understand some LLMs are better than other LLMs at doing certain functions.
Yep.
I'm wondering, is that sort of by accident, or are they trying to specialize, or are they trying to sort of be everything to everybody? So going forward, do you think every LLM's objective is to be the best at everything, or are they trying to specialize?
Yeah, to be honest, these are decisions being made behind closed doors, right? We don't know, is the honest answer. Like OpenAI might have an objective to say, hey, we're here to create AGI, therefore we want to be the best at every single domain, right? So that's one train of thought. The reality is we don't know, right? We don't know what they're trying to do. Now, we can glean based on conversations, interviews, etc. The CPO of Anthropic recently came out and said that he believes over time that there's just going to be a natural specialization that occurs because of the ways in which each of these labs are deploying their resources to invest in improving across a specific domain. So as an example, Claude in the industry is referred to as the leading LLM that is used for coding. And then the CPO of Anthropic commented on that and said, yes, that is something they're consciously making a decision to do, consciously choosing to improve in that. So whether that means over time we're going to see verticalized LLMs, therefore it creates a much bigger domain here for if you want an LLM that is very specific just for financial analysis, or you want an LLM very specific just to creative writing, or an LLM very specific just to coding, perhaps that might be something that happens, right? Or whether those verticalized use cases happen from the major labs, whether it's by Anthropic, that might happen, right? Which way it goes, we don't know. What they're thinking of doing, we don't know, right? But we are seeing even just very early, I say early because, you know what, we're almost 3 years in, we're seeing just this natural progression across LLMs being used for different use cases, right? Right now, there's a fairly large intersection where it seems quite competitive, right? OpenAI versus Anthropic versus Grok are used for similar things. You can see how many different LLM providers just came out with deep research, which is essentially a research agent. You can see that being a frontier where they want to compete, right? But over time, you know, some people in the industry, as I said, are predicting that there will be a natural specialization and verticalization of the use cases for each LLM. But, you know, it's all conjecture. We don't know.
So it is not like C++ versus Java, right? It is not, I use either one of the programming languages to solve a particular problem. It's not going to be like that. There is going to be verticalization. Like you said, going forward is our thought process right now. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so let's take the perspective of whether it's an organization looking to invest in becoming a specialist in a specific LLM, or whether it's an engineer, or whether it's, you know, whoever it might be making a decision that you're asking, right? This is how I forward project it. If somebody makes a bet that Claude is going to be the absolute best at coding, right, and it's going to continue its dominance in coding, but it's also going to continue its investment in becoming better and better and better at that, right? Number one, that has to be a directional bet that that person who's making the decision is willing to make. Let's assume then it goes that way, right? Does that mean that no other LLM is going to focus on coding and focus on the ability to actually automate or create an agent in that workflow? I think that's unlikely. I think unlikely that people are going to say, you know what, Claude's won, screw it. We're not actually going to invest in building any specialization there. But what that means is that if you look to the end customers, and again, we don't know how this market plays out. We don't know if there's going to be customers of people who want implementation partners for Claude, right, to create a coding agent that they can use internally. But if there was a potential market like that, then you can see the value of potentially specializing in an LLM that is the best, or quote unquote, subjectively understood to be the best in the industry related to coding, because then suddenly there's a level of defensibility of having an information asymmetry of the different nuances of where that LLM can be used and can't be used. So we have to bet on two things then. We have to bet on, number one, that Claude continues its dominance and leadership specific to that workflow related to coding as this example. But then the secondary thing we have to think about is, if Claude does in fact continue to lead that, is there going to be a demand for, whether it's one person, whether it's one company, whether it's within your company, to have a need and demand for that level of specialization to say, hey, we want to introduce a coding agent. Therefore, we absolutely must be using Claude. Because if those two bets prove to be true, sure, maybe there's some value there in a level of specialization. But, you know, how I see things in terms of betting on the probability, I think having a broader understanding of the different LLMs and where they can be used will actually open up broader opportunities here, given the fact that we don't know what happens tomorrow, right? We don't know how much OpenAI is going to innovate. We don't know how much Claude's going to innovate specific to other verticals outside what they're already specialized or what they're already known in the industry to have a competitive advantage in. And so being more of a generalist in a space that innovates this quickly, where every single day feels like a brand new year, and where the adjacent possible is something we can't even predict because we don't even know what's coming next, that opens up the next possibilities. It feels a little bit, well, from my perspective at least, it feels a little bit premature here to invest this heavily in investing in one LLM and being only specialized in it. And again, other people are betting with their feet, right? People are choosing to work at an Anthropic versus an OpenAI. So by very definition of how they're choosing to spend their time and invest their career, well, they're choosing that that provider, that lab is going to be superior in certain domains, right? Whether it is at a macro and generalized across all domains, or whether people might be going to Anthropic because they buy into the vision that Anthropic, and again, I don't know if this is in fact the internal vision, but if Anthropic are vocalizing that they want to be the industry leading LLM specific to coding capabilities, maybe people subscribe to that vision, resonate with that vision, and then therefore choosing to spend their time there and specializing not just in terms of how to use it, but also specializing in what they're trying to build. So, it's all speculation in the industry, but that's my take as of now.
What does the switching cost look like compared to some of the other things we have?
Yeah, that is pretty nuanced because at a macro, I'd say switching costs are pretty low. And that's what's so exciting about LLMs, right? It's just an API call. So we can put in a different API key, right? And then use Claude versus OpenAI versus potentially Perplexity. There's different things that they're good at. But over time, what does this mean? Well, if the feature sets continue to differentiate, right? And in the intersection of the Venn diagram of what multiple of these LLMs are really good at, if they start to become slightly differentiated or even more differentiated, i.e. Claude doubles down on coding, maybe OpenAI doesn't. In this example and hypothetical, right? What does that mean? It means that, okay, if you are heavily investing in something in an LLM to help with coding, and then a certain lab chooses directionally in terms of its product roadmap to go a different way, well, suddenly there potentially may be an upskilling or an opportunity cost in terms of how specialized you can be in terms of implementing that LLM. But from what we're seeing right now, the switching costs are pretty low. And that's why, as builders and as people who use LLMs, it really is a rising tide lifts all boats. Like everybody is benefiting here from LLMs getting more and more sophisticated. Switching costs right now seem pretty low. Does that continue in the future? Maybe not. If it becomes very specialized and you've built an entire workflow related to, say, Claude, or an entire workflow that's related to the nuances of OpenAI. And we've seen this in the products that we've built and the workflows that we've built. Certain models perform better in certain ways. So if you want to immediately just switch to another model, maybe you have to be adjusting the prompts, but maybe there's an entire feedback loop where you have to adjust prompts, and then adjust, your entire pipeline there. But at a macro, the switching costs are pretty low. But if we go into the nuance here and you're getting a specific output that is really customized and really fine-tuned to the exact pipeline based on exactly what your customers want, based on exactly what is giving you the highest productivity and the highest yield, well, then switching to another model, unless it interprets the prompts in the exact same way, even how you prompt across LLMs differs slightly, right? At a macro, switching costs are low. On the micro, depending on how nuanced you want to be, depending on the implication of small nuances in the output and small differences in the output, maybe the switching costs start to become a little bit higher.